Hi everyone, I'm Scott Schneider and this is Stereo Niche. Hey, this week I'm going to do a summary of where we stand with all of the reviews I've done so far of receivers and amp preamp combos. That's models from Yamaha, Sony, Pioneer, Kyocera. Stick around. Alright, so before we get started, let me explain a little bit about how I do my reviews for gear. So what I put together is a point system based on specs and features that I think are relative and very important if you're going to use a vintage system today. So things on the spec side, if it handles a 4-ohm speaker requirement, for example, then it gets bonus points for that because that's a very important feature to have. On the other side of the equation, if it handles, say, MC cartridges for phonos, and if it can accommodate those, then it gets an additional bonus for that because that's kind of an uncommon feature, but very useful if you want to use MC cartridges without having to buy an external one. So I've done that consistently across all of these receivers and amps, and so that way we can then compare them at the end and see how do they rank as far as features. Of course, it all depends on what your individual spec needs are, so you can see those broken out individually and decide for yourself how you would actually rate them, but this is how I've done it, and at the end of it, I do put them in order of sequence of which one is highest to lowest in points, and I've also broken it out by power only, so you can see which ones have the most power to the least power. So watch it all the way through, and I hope you enjoy. Well, let's kick it off with the first receiver review that I did, and that's on the Pioneer SX1010. A bit of a legendary receiver. This is one that is considered by many to be the first monster receiver. It has 100 watts of power, so it was one of the very first receivers to come out and break that triple-digit 100 watt mark. Came out in '74, ran through '76, and retailed for $700. And so in addition to it having 100 watts, it also delivered and has a spec for 4-ohm speakers, which was exceptional. I don't know if that was unusual at the time, but it's a great feature to have, and so it got a 30-point bonus for that. So on to sources, it had the ability to connect 2 separate phonos. So it got 20 points for 2 phonos. And then additional sources, you could connect up to 3 more, so it got 30 points for that. Has the balance, has volume muting, has a loudness switch, and on tone controls does have a very important tone defeat switch, and then a separate bass and treble. Has a nice high-low filter switch for recording, and then on to some of the bonus features. It has pre-out and amp in separate. You can separate those two, so it got additional 20 points. A nice implementation of a wood cabinet, so 20 points for that. And then AC plugs, has 1 switched and 2 unswitched, so it got points there. And then the big kind of bonus here, it handles 3 separate speakers connections. So you can connect 3 sets of speakers, got 30 points for that. All totaled, it had 240 points, and that sort of set the stage and the high mark right out of the gate at 240 points. The next review was a bit of an unusual receiver, not something you see very often, but it was from JVC. And this is a 4-channel unit. A bit unique, it's kind of a, has unique features with these dual EQ settings on each side of the unit. It just sort of, it's kind of cool in a way. It's a little bit unique and awkward, but it actually very smooth sounding. So it came out in '72 and ran through '75. This was, an interesting era of 4 channels trying to get a foothold in the market, and it was quite, tough, I think, for JVC and other companies. It never caught traction totally, but a lot of companies came out thinking that was the next big thing. And so this ran from '72 to '75 and had a retail of $529. In 2-channel, it was rated at 34 watts. It does have a 4-ohm spec, so that got an additional 30 points for that. has one phono, so got 10 points. Onto additional tape resource or sources that you can add to it. Had 5 additional sources, quite a few, so I got 50 points for that. Has balance control, a loudness switch, and then has lots of control over the tone. So because it has its own EQ, I gave it points for having bass, mid, and treble control. So I got 5 points each for that. On to AC connections, it had 1 each of the switched and unswitched, and then you could connect 2 different sets of speakers. So in total, it added up to 150 points for this cool little receiver. Next review was on the Kenwood 11-2. This is an interesting series. I couldn't find really a lot of information. So the series, it ran from 11-1 and then a 2 and then a 3. And then the difference between them was the power output, the watts that they produced. So this one was, I couldn't find the MSRP, as a matter of fact. I was trying to find it. It's the only one that I'm lacking at the moment, but I'll have to dig it out and see if I can find it again. But right out of the gate, as far as power, it got 15 points. It can handle 4 ohm loads, so it got an additional 30 points for that. Into phonos, it has 2 phonos, so you could connect 2 different turntables there, and you got 20 points. In addition to other resources, it had 3 inputs, so you could connect 3 different sources there. It got 30 points. Balance has loudness, and it has separate bass, mid, and treble. So one of the few units out there that sort of added that mid. On into some of the other cool functions. Gets a bonus. It has power meters. So it got 10 points for that. Can also separate the pre-out and amp-in connections. So got additional 20 points. Obviously it has a big wood cabinet, so that got bonus points for that. And then on switches, AC switches, it got 1 switched, 1 unswitched. Got a couple points for that. And then speakers, in another unit here that handles 3 sets of speakers, so I got 30 points. All added up, 215 points for the Kenwood 11-2. The next review was on the very sought after and highly regarded Marantz 2275. Now this ran from 74 to 76. And retailed for around $650. So on the point side, came in at 75 watts, so got 15 points for that. Also handles 4 ohm speakers, so got an additional 30 points because that's very important. Has a single phono input, so can handle 1 turntable, 10 points there, but 3 other sources, so it got 30 points. Has separate balance, loudness switch. Has a tone defeat switch, separate bass, mid, and treble. Also has a high-low filter, which is very important for recording. And then on to some of the bonus areas. Has pre-out amp-in separation, so 20 points. And I gave it 20 points for the optional wood cab here. Has a couple of AC switches or connections. And then you can connect 2 different sets of speakers, so got 20 points for that. So all total, it has 205 points. Well, next review I did is on the Yamaha CR 1020. What a beauty. This series ran from 77 to 79 and retailed for $560. So it came in sort of in the mid-range there, just under 100 watts, but has got 15 points for that, and has a 4 ohm spec as well, so got 30 points. Has the ability to connect 2 phonos, so got 20 points there. Other sources, you can connect 3 more, so 30 points. Balance switch, has a volume muting switch, decibel muting switch, which is a nice feature to have. Not as common on most receivers. Has loudness. Has tone controls for bass, mid, and treble, and then a high-low filter. Also has power meters, another nice feature, and get bonus for that. Pre-out amp-in separation, has that feature as well. A wood cabinet, has separate or AC connections, has one switch to unswitched, and can connect up to 3 sets of speakers. So quite feature laden, and in total points came up to 250 points. Now these are separates, but I am going to include them into the sort of receiver review and just keep everything together where I have sets. So this is the Kyocera C910 Pre and the B910 amp. These were very expensive. These were produced a little bit later than everything else that I reviewed. These were made in the mid-80s, from around 84 to 88, and they were not inexpensive. The preamp retailed for $1,200 and the amp was $2,000. So a pretty big step up as far as cost compared to other receivers of the day. So starting off, it has over 100 watts, so it gets 20 points. Has a 4 ohm spec as well, so got 30 additional points there. Phonos can connect one phono. Remember, this was, they're in the era of CDs, so not as frequent and common to have multiple phonos. Has the ability, though, to handle MC cartridges, so it did handle that and gets an additional 20 points. You could connect up to 6 other sources, so it got 60 points for that. As a balance, went on to tone controls, has an on-off defeat switch for that, and then separate bass and treble controls. On the preamp, pre-out, obviously it's already that way, but it gets the additional bonus for that because that's just part of the process here. And AC switches has up to 5 between switched and unswitched, and then 1 set of speakers can be connected. Somewhat, that's the low side of the points here, because most receivers can handle multiple sets of speakers, at least 2, sometimes 3. But on amps, most of the time, of course, it's only going to be 1. So in this case, only gets 10 points. So when you add it all up, it came to 230 points. So the most recent review, it's the Sony STR V7. Very, very nice built unit. These weren't produced very long. Came out in '79 and ran through 1980, so only a couple of years. This was the biggest unit of this model line and retailed for $900. It it's over 100 watts, so it got 20 points for that. Has 2 phono connections, so it got 20 points. In addition, it's one of the very few, and I think the only receiver I've rated so far, that has the ability to use MC cartridges. So that's a bonus. It gets 20 points for that. Has additional 3 sources that can be connected, so 30 points. Has balance, loudness. Has a tone defeat switch, which is great. That's a little bit unusual. Has separate bass and treble, so it got 5 points there. A high-low filter switch, somewhat unusual, 10 points. Has some nice power meters, that's a bonus, of 20 points. And then AC switches, 1 each, and then 2 sets of speakers, so it got 20 points for that. So it added up in total to be 185 points. Okay, so this is a breakdown of how they ranked in order from most features to fewest features, depending on how I've rated them. So it's the Yamaha CR 1020, has the most features and functionality and comes in at 250 points, followed right on its heels, the Pioneer SX 1010 being that groundbreaking, first monster receiver, had quite a bit of features too. Right behind it at 240. And then the separates from Kyocera, 230 points. Kind of thought that the Kyocera would really, before I put them through and sort of did a ranking, I thought they might be the most, have the most features, but given that it was a sort of a different time frame after the CD, that probably cut back on a feature or two, for that, particular era. Right behind that is the Kenwood 11. I think that's big bang for the buck. Lots of features for it. Then the Marantz and the Sony. The Sony was the one that sort of surprised me, being the top of the line. Fewer features, so it just didn't get quite as many points. And then no real surprise in the JVC. Its main function, of course, and marketing direction was being 4-channel. So now when we take a different look and we rank them just by power only, Quite a different picture here. Kyocera, not surprising. I think you would sort of expect separates to be pretty high up as far as power is concerned, a dedicated amp. But it's the Sony. Sony went from near the bottom to tied for first place here in the amount of power at 150 watts. So pretty significant change in the way they're ranking on this particular view. Right behind it, that first receiver, or at least one of the first receivers to break in the triple-digit power, the Pioneer SX1010. And then sort of grouped together, there's not really a significant difference between the Kenwood, the Marantz, and the Yamaha. They're sort of all on the same level here between 80 and 70 watts. And then lastly, JVC again, being a 4-channel, not a powerhouse, on that side of the fence here when we're just looking at power. So anyway, that's how they break down when it's just power only. All right, well, there you have it. I think maybe a couple of surprises here and there. I was surprised, as I got started, that the Yamaha took off and, got the most points as far as features. It was pretty close there with the Pioneer. But then if you break it out just by power, the Sony, sort of leads the receiver stack. And of course, not too surprising that separates, the Kyocera, ranks. I did put the Kyocera up on top, by the way, because it also can accommodate a 4-ohm load. That does not, the Sony can't do that. So that's why it's second in that list, if you wanted to know why it was in that order. But anyway, thought it was a cool breakdown. Gives you an idea of what feature sets are out there, and you can certainly take a look at that and see which ones are most important to you. You might rank them differently, of course, based on your own needs. You might need more phonos, you might need more connections to different sets of speakers. But it gives you the ability at least to go through and give yourself an idea of where do they rank. So hope you enjoyed that. If you want to keep up with future videos, hit subscribe. You want to make sure you get notified, hit that bell. And as always, thank you guys for tuning in.